Should you pay off your debt or should you invest money? Now, of course, the banks would prefer you, in many cases, just invest your money. They can collect fees on that and also go on charging you debt, mortgage interest or debt interest. Let's get some perspective from Jason Heath. He's an advice-only financial planner at Objective Financial Planners, meaning that you don't collect commission on products, you charge a fee. Is that right, Jason?
That's correct, Danny. Thanks for having me.
So it's a perennial question, isn't it? I guess the one thing about paying off debt is you know what the rate of return is going to be because you're not going to be paying the interest on that debt.
It is a guaranteed rate of return, right? And I think that that has some appeal for a conservative investor. And I think that that's a good point as it relates to trying to make a decision between paying down debt or investing. For a conservative investor, paying down debt may not be a bad choice. Ideally, for investing to be a better option, and this is a broad generalization because there's a number of other considerations, but if you think you can earn a higher rate of return, an annualized percentage rate of return from your investments, than the interest rate you're paying on your debt, you may be better off investing. So somebody who's got a relatively high risk tolerance may bias towards investing over debt repayment. But if you're a conservative investor and you're earning 2% on your GICs, borrowing at 4 or 5% probably puts you in a position where you're falling behind.
Of course, we have to remember, certainly your RSPs, though, don't think twice before cashing them in to pay down debt, because you'll pay tax on the darn money you take out of the plan.
Oh, for sure. And I think the RSP nuance is really important because when you talk about investing versus paying down debt, it depends which account you're investing in. So if you're contributing into an RSP account and comparing that to paying down your mortgage, if you're in a relatively high tax bracket today, particularly if you think you'll be in a relatively low tax bracket in the future, that's something that will also cause you to bias more towards investing over debt repayment for being advantageous. On the flip side, if somebody is in a relatively low tax bracket today, arguably, regardless of whether they've got debt to pay down, RSP contributions can be detrimental because you might be pulling money out at a higher tax rate in the future. You might be losing access to government benefits. But definitely if we're talking about RSPs versus mortgage, for a high income individual, RSPs have a bit of a check mark in that column. TFSAs, I think, are a little bit more on even playing field. And again, you go back to the GIC comparison. If you've got a GIC and you're earning 2% or a high interest savings account or something like that, but you're borrowing at 4 or 5 on a mortgage, let alone, unsecured debt at a higher interest rate or heaven forbid credit card debt, debt repayment probably wins that competition.
Of course, some people say, or they're very wary of going into retirement with debt. Give us your thoughts there. And I know there's all kinds of it depends factors.
Yeah, look, I think in a perfect world, people would go into retirement with no debt. In a perfect world, nobody would have debt, of course, but in the real world, sometimes it happens. And I think there's a lot of people living in expensive parts of the country where they have been hard-pressed and they will continue to be hard-pressed to pay off their debt. Some people can, fix things, so to speak, from a debt perspective by downsizing, but that's not always possible. So I think, you can go into retirement or approach it with intentions to pay off your debt. But there can be situations where going into retirement with debt is okay if you can afford to continue to make the payments, if you've got the income from pensions or other sources, or if perhaps it's buying you, 5 more years in your home before you do a downsize to extinguish your debt.
I'm just trying to think, though, Bay Street and the banks, in a way, they'd love you to go on having debt, but also buy mutual funds so they can make money off you 2 ways. If you just pay down your debts and don't invest, it's really not as lucrative for them.
Oh, for sure. It's tough because there's a bias, there's a conflict of interest that exists with the banks or even with, your typical financial advisors who would prefer you invest money rather than paying down debt. And I think by and large, I lean towards investing over debt repayment. But again, risk tolerance is incredibly important. And regardless of what the math says, I think when you're making personal finance decisions, you need to come at it from a personal perspective. You need to consider the psychological impacts. Some people get a better sort of emotional rate of return, so to speak, paying down debt than investing. And even if the math supports investing, sometimes those people can consider debt repayment. And at the end of the day, becoming financially independent involves increasing your net worth. And whether you increase your assets or decrease your liabilities, they're both good. They're just different flavors of good.
Yeah. Did you, sorry, sorry, Jason, I missed you there. We're very tight for time. Your overall inclination would be pay down debt, did you say?
My overall inclination would be invest in RSPs over TFSAs for most people. But if you're a conservative investor, consider debt repayment for sure, now that interest rates are at a more normal level.
Okay, Jason, thank you very much.